So, what do Torterra from Pokemon, Ibanwomon from Digimon, and cards like Pyramid Turtle from Yu-Gi-Oh! All have in common? They all have designs inspired by mythology around a series of animals collectively known as giant tortoises. To begin with, giant tortoise isn't referring to one specific species, but rather one of several of the largest species of testudines in the world. Testudine being the name for the family of reptiles containing all turtles, tortoises, and terrapins. The two species most commonly referred to as giant tortoise are the Galapagos tortoise, naturally found on the Galapagos Islands and the largest tortoise species on Earth, and the Aldabra tortoise, scaling in just behind the Galapagos as the second largest species, natively found in the Seychelles Islands just north of Madagascar. Now, these two species are massive, with some of the largest Galapagos specimens weighing in around an impressive 600 pounds. It's worth noting, however, that these giant individuals are exclusively male. In most giant tortoise species, they tend to display a phenomenon called sexual dimorphism, which basically just means that the males and the females have different physical appearances. In the case of giant tortoises such as the Aldabra tortoise, the difference between male and female is almost exclusively based on their size, with females reaching a full size around half that of the males. Tortoises have a reputation as one of the longest living species on the planet, and rightfully so. The oldest living tortoise we know of actually belongs to the second largest species, the Aldabra tortoise. His name is Jonathan, and he currently resides on the island of St. Helens in the UK, where as of this year, 2023, he will be turning an astounding 191 years old. How exactly do tortoises live this long? Well, they're thought to be one of a handful of species in the world to exhibit something called negligible senescence. To put this phrase into simple terms, giant tortoises don't appear to show physical degradation with age. Their bodies don't break down in the same way that ours do. So, conceptually, in the absence of outside factors such as disease, starvation, or predation, the organism may not have an upper limit to how long they are capable of living. Other species thought to experience this phenomenon include some species of lobster, jellyfish, even a species of shark called the Greenland shark. Now, it's important to mention that negligible senescence is just a theory. Needless to say, it's virtually impossible to determine whether or not an organism can actually live forever. It's very possible that these animals simply live longer than would be practical for us to be able to keep track of. And there's no denying at the end of the day that these animals all age in a way that is vastly different than most other living things. Many of these animals even maintain their fertility, that is to say their ability to reproduce, into these triple-digit ages. The best we can do is make observations and extrapolate off the data that we have. Giant tortoises like the Galapagos and Aldabra are exclusively vegetarian, enjoying a diverse diet of fruits, vegetables, seeds, and grasses. Despite the reputation most testudines carry of being slow, dull creatures, testudines as a whole, and especially tortoises, are surprisingly intelligent and have very diverse personalities. As an example, I would like to introduce you all to Jasmine, a friend of mine and coworker at ZooTampa in Florida.
Hi guys, my name is Jasmine and I'm a herpetologist here at ZooTampa, which means I work with all of the reptiles and amphibians, including our giant Aldabra tortoises.
I've had the incredible privilege of leading guided tours with the 3 Aldabra tortoises at the zoo. But if you really want to get to know an animal, you gotta ask the experts. And who would know more than the amazing staff who work with them each and every day?
So right now I'm hanging out with my good friend Big Al. So Al is a good example of what an adult male Aldabra tortoise looks like. He is 51 years young, and he is 457 pounds. So Al here is a fan favorite at the zoo just because he has so much personality. Tortoises are looked at a lot of the times as being dim-witted, really slow, not super bright, but that is not the truth at all for Al. I think of him as kind of a golden retriever of tortoises. He goes out and seeks attention. If you're not paying attention to him, he'll beeline straight for you. He loves enrichment, and he just loves hanging out with people and connecting with our guests here at the zoo. And so our individual here is Dabby. Dabby is a female Aldabra tortoise, and she is full grown. She is actually older than Al. She's 54 years old, half the size of the male. And Dabby here, she has a very silly personality. She kind of stays in her lane, keeps to herself. She will go out and seek attention from people, but she usually enjoys having a nice big nap after the tortoise encounter. I actually think she's probably the smartest out of the three. She's really good with problem-solving skills, and she even knows how to open her own barn door at the end of the day to let herself into her night house. So our last friend that we're going to meet here today is Sly. Now we're not too sure if Sly is a male or female. They're still too young to tell. And Sly, we're thinking, is in between early 20s to mid 20s. Sly came to us at kind of a young age, so he's gotten a lot used to people coming in over time and hanging out with him, and he's turned into quite a fantastic animal to use for our tortoise encounter.
So obviously these tortoises are awesome, but how do they relate to gaming? Turtles and tortoises are one of the 4 primary families of reptiles, those being lizards, snakes, crocodilians, which contain alligators and crocodiles, and of course, testudines. Let's call a spade here. Reptiles are awesome and extremely marketable. These animals are incredibly cool, and members of each family are very commonly featured prominently in all sorts of games, movies, and other media. Pokemon alone has 12 different species, each designed after different varieties of turtle, featuring everything from sea turtles to snapping turtles. Torkoal has a particularly interesting design, turning the classic shell that all testudines have in common into a furnace. But the Pokemon that I want to talk most about is Torterra. Torterra takes inspiration from a myth found all over the world of something known as the world turtle. The mythology involves the idea that the entire world exists on the back of an enormous sea turtle, which grew to carry the planet as the planet itself grew. This mythos can be found everywhere from Native American to Hindu to Chinese belief systems. Each interpretation is a little different, but the idea of a giant, world-bearing turtle certainly feels possible when you have giants already walking among us. Torterra's evolutionary line borrows this idea, with its smallest form, Turtwig, having a fairly barren shell, followed by its middle form, Grottle, where some plants have begun to sprout, until we reach its final form, bearing what appears to be trees and even small mountains upon its shell. Fittingly enough, the movie Detective Pikachu even scaled this idea up, showing enormous, mountain-sized Torterra with actual forests borne upon their backs. While the Pokédex entries for Torterra are not super specific about real-life tortoises, a few do make mention that ancient people once thought that deep beneath the ground, a giant Torterra dwelled, a clear reference to the fact that the world tortoise is thought to have carried the world upon its back. Enormous testudines can be found in the Digimon franchise as well, with one of the 4 mighty Digimon sovereigns, Ibanwumon. Ibanwumon not only shares some similar traits to Torterra and the idea of the world turtle, displaying again a massive tree on its back, but it also has parts of its origin in another giant turtle myth known as the Black Tortoise. There are actually several series of Digimon that borrow from different Asian folklore, including the Deva, a series of Digimon that were inspired by the Chinese zodiac. Ruling over these Deva are the 4 Digimon sovereigns, each inspired by a member of the 4 auspicious beasts of the Chinese constellations. We have the Azure Dragon of the East, Azulongmon, the Vermilion Bird of the South, Zhuquamon, the White Tiger of the West, Baihumon, and the Black Tortoise of the North, Ibanwumon. Ibanwumon digivolves from Orochimon, a many-headed snake Digimon that probably warrants an episode all to itself. As the Guardian of the North, Ibanwumon commands 3 of the 12 Deva Digimon, specifically the Pig Deva Vikaralamon, the Rat Deva Kumbiramon, and the Oxdeva Vajraman. We even have another example of these themes in Eldradimon, a newer Digimon that has features of the world turtle, but also clearly references the fabled city of El Dorado, the city of gold. Yu-Gi-Oh's references are a little less explicit, with cards like Pyramid Turtle showing a giant tortoise with another giant structure on its back. And yes, that is a giant tortoise, not a turtle. You can tell by the general shape of the feet. One of the ways you can actually tell turtles apart from tortoises is that most turtles tend to have clawed feet, while tortoises tend to have much shorter nails. We also have the example of Island Turtle, an extremely old vanilla monster that shares a lot of similar design features to both Torterra and Eldradimon. This imagery is seen again in another video game, Legend of Zelda: Majora's Mask, with a giant sleeping turtle being mistaken for a small island until it's been woken up by Link. The turtle makes other appearances in the Great Bay stage of Super Smash Bros. Melee, with a collectible trophy that mentions the ancient age of the animal and calls out its incredible wisdom. Testudines feature prominently on several other Yu-Gi-Oh cards as well, with the likes of Emerald Tortoise, Catapult Turtle, and Jar Turtle, each displaying creative uses of the Testudine's fairly simple design. But one commonality that almost every turtle-themed card shares is a defensive stat that far outweighs its attack stat, with only a few strange exceptions existing, such as UFO Turtle and Bujingi Turtle, both of which feature the pointed head structure of a snapping turtle, so I'm willing to let them slide. Giant tortoises are a species being monitored to make sure their numbers stay stable. Thankfully, such large animals don't face too many natural predators, and the shells have never really caught on as a hunting trophy, but they do still face another problem that one of our resident tortoises at ZooTampa is all too familiar with.
So Sly has kind of an interesting backstory of how we ended up with him. So Sly's named Sly because he was found on Sly Avenue outside of the zoo. So we think that Sly was a dumped pet, which is very unfortunate. They are getting more popular in the pet trade at the moment, and people who probably don't have the lifestyle to be owning giant tortoises are starting to own these animals, and they're realizing very fast that they're a lot of work and they grow really big.
Unfortunately, giant tortoises don't begin life as giants. As babies, they're incredibly cute, being only around the size of ping pong balls, which makes them very popular in the pet trade. Sadly, many people purchase these animals as exotic pets without having any clue regarding what they're getting into. Especially in the case of the third largest tortoise, the sulcata. When people realize they've bitten off more than they can chew, it's not uncommon to see these animals dumped off into the wild, which creates some incredibly big problems in the form of invasive species. An invasive species is an animal found in an area that is not part of its natural habitat. In these areas, these animals don't have natural predators and can sometimes create entire populations that are able to outcompete with native species. What can you do to help? Well, before you purchase a new pet, it's a good idea to do as much research as possible so you know the needs of the animal that you're thinking of adding to your family. Many animals, especially tortoises, can live an incredibly long time, so if you aren't prepared for the commitment ahead of you, it may be a good idea to consider a different pet. Even I, your avid herpetologist, have a tortoise of my own, this adorable hingeback tortoise named Hingy. Before agreeing to take Hingy in from a friend of mine, I made sure I knew what he needed for his habitat, as well as the kinds of food that he would need. Tortoises can make great pets, but make sure you're aware of just what you're getting into, because these guys can be a bit bigger of a time commitment than your typical hamster.
To own these animals, and they're realizing very fast that they're a lot of work and they grow really big. And I'm getting bulldozed by a beautiful tortoise. Okay.